The cold weather is here, Hamilton, and we know that we have a crisis of chronic homelessness that is only getting worse. This week, Council decided to delay their decision on the HATS project once again, kicking it back to staff until January. So what does that mean for the HATS project? What does that mean for the people in Hamilton who need the housing? And now I'm starting to think, what is really going on? Because before it was that they didn't like the public land location of Sir John A. Macdonald, but then someone privately, Bill Curran, donated a lot, and they don't seem to like that either. So is it an issue of location? Is it an issue of budgeting? Is it an issue of rights for the people who might be housed in the HATS program? Is this thing dead in the water and council's just wasting everybody's time, including the volunteers and staff, by delaying their decision on it? But let's really talk honestly here on the OShow about solutions and about what's really going on with the HATS program, because we're in a crisis and we need to get on with it. So joining us here on the program, we have returning Tom Cooper. Tom was here last time with Ted McMeekin.
Hey, Laura, good to see you.
Joining us for the first time is Don Seymour. He is the executive director of Wesley Urban Ministries, an organization that's been around for 70 years, working on these very kinds of issues and working directly with the most vulnerable people in our community. Don Seymour, welcome to the OShow.
Thank you. Good morning, Laura.
Good morning. We'd have had you on before, I'm sure, but you're relatively new to the city, only a couple of years, so good to have you here. And Sara Mayo, you're not new to the city. We've talked about your research many times at the Social Planning Research Council, but it's great to have you on the OShow for the first time. And I can't wait to dig into some things you've looked at in terms of what other communities are doing around this and how Hamilton fares comparatively. Great to have you on the program, Sara.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for talking about these important issues.
So let me go right to you, Tom. First of all, tell me how you felt when that decision came down by the committee last week, which I assume is going to be ratified at council this week, or is expected to be. How did you feel about that, and what do you think it portends for the HATS program?
Yeah, it's a great question, Laura. I was certainly disappointed, frustrated. I think there's, as you referenced, there's a lot of fantastic volunteers who've been behind this idea for more than a year now. And to really see it kick down the road even farther is deeply disappointing. But we want to get it right. We want to make sure that this project can move ahead in the proper way. The Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters is really predicated on stabilizing people who have nowhere else to turn in our community, people who are facing homelessness, who are currently living in alleys or in alcoves, who aren't able to access the traditional shelter system for a variety of reasons. Maybe they're concerned about their health. Maybe they're in a couple and they don't want to break up. There's also concerns about safety, of course. So the idea around the tiny shelters is to create this small community of 10, maybe upwards of 20 eventually, tiny cabins that people could have some autonomy in. They would have a key to it. They'd be able to stabilize, get healthy, stay warm. And you said it, winter is coming. And we have far too many people on the streets right now. There's as many as 1,600 people experiencing homelessness, some of whom do use traditional shelters, but many of whom don't as well. And this is only going to be a drop in the bucket, but we think it's an important step forward to help protect those lives.
I see, I'll get back to you with a whole bunch of questions, Tom, on some of the opposition to the project, but I see you nodding emphatically, Don. And you, of course, showed up at committee and made a presentation in support of HATS. And one of the things that you said is that this group of volunteers has been, or you've never seen a group of volunteers dot so many I's and cross so many T's and work so hard on something. So do you think this is a situation, Don, where perfection, getting it perfect, is an enemy of doing something good and maybe something that's urgently necessary?
Absolutely. Perfection is not a goal in this case. Getting people housed and warm is a goal. We like to go on the 80-20 rule when you think about it. If you're 80% of the way there, like implement, get going. The other 20% you figure out along the way. That's the learning part, that that makes whatever you're trying to create better. So like Tom, I was very surprised. We had a lot of hope for this new council, given the progressive campaigning they did. I thought this was a chance for this new group of people to show some real leadership. And in my opinion, we got what we've been seeing for the last 4 years: deferrals, delays, and it was like I think, as I've said to a few people, I'm still not over my anger about this. I walk out of my vehicle every day past John Rebecca Park, and I see people every single day in an encampment. When I described that to the committee, and it seemed to fall on deaf ears, in my opinion. I know they're good people, but how you can do this when you walk right out of City Hall and go around the block and it is in your face. You can't avoid it downtown. So again, disappointing. However, when I say that I've never seen anybody this detailed in their planning, everything from including clients, they've even got their governance structure worked out. If we as agencies who get millions of dollars every year to do our work had to put in that kind of work, we don't have to put in those kinds of grant applications to get the money that we're given to provide service. So again, you would think that a community, when there's a crisis, communities step up. If this was a flood, we'd all be out there building sandbags right now. And so we're in this flood. We're all up to our waist trying to deal with this, and we've got people on the street that are over their heads right now, and we're deferring and till January. And we know how cold January is. We know how cold it is, in December.
Yeah, not a lot of hope for the holidays. And let's face it, not always room at the inn. No matter what people say about the shelter, we hear all the time. We did a show on this last December, not on hats, but on the affordable housing and homelessness crisis. And people cannot get rooms at the inn over the holidays, and delaying this hats decision doesn't improve on that situation at all. I want to get back to you, Don, about the Progressive Council and your disappointment, because I know that council is paying attention to this show because they paid attention to the promotional tweet that I put out on the weekend about doing this show. So we know that they're watching. Sara, I saw you nodding your head when Don was talking about the rising water and that we're in a flood, and what the response would be if we were all in a flood together. We'd be setting up sandbags, we'd be bailing people out, we'd be helping people find shelter. So what is your reaction coming from the Social Planning Research Council and all the work that your organization does to understand the details of the needs in our community? What was your response when you saw the delay on the HATS decision this week?
Well, I think Dawn's metaphor of a flood is really an important one, because we are in an emergency crisis, and we do need more action and less delay. But at the same time, we're in an emergency situation, and we need multiple solutions. We can't just be doing the flood remediation of stopping the flood. We also have to build more homes for people who have been impacted by this emergency crisis, and so HATS, like Tom said, is a small part of the solution, and there's other solutions. And I would hope that council doesn't limit its intervention in this area to just HATS, because, as Tom says, HATS is not housing, it's shelter, in the sense of just a warm place to stay that's safe, and not a permanent housing situation. And permanent housing and permanent supportive housing is what the city, permanent affordable housing, permanent accessible housing is what the city needs more of, and council needs to take action on as well.
So that's what pisses me off so much about this, Tom, is that, it's not a solution. You and Ted didn't market it on the OShow as a solution. This is a temporary, community stepping up, trying to help people survive the winter kind of thing. Yes, it requires tax dollars. Yes, it might be around for a while as we look at these other solutions, but It feels to me like council is making excuses because they don't want this little piece of the puzzle for whatever reason, political, budgetary, NIMBY, whatever. So they're wasting time. They're keeping hope up, maybe. They're wasting staff time on this. I mean, maybe you don't feel that way. Maybe you still have hope for this, but I'm starting to see patterns of council kicking a can down the road, and they do this when they want to kill something.
Yeah, well, I tend to be a goofy optimist, Laura. So I still think there is hope, and I think council can still get behind this idea. As you'll recall, and you mentioned it, we were offered Sir John A. Macdonald High School's field more than a year ago by the school board, and that didn't work for a few different reasons. There were some structural problems with the building itself, and it looked like it was going to be demolished. Plus, there were radio separation bylaws at play, and now what we heard from council the other day is that, well, let's look at Sir John A. again. So what's old is new again. We don't know if that will be a possible site potentially just for this winter, but we're having those conversations. We're looking at some other sites in the community. I was very gladdened by Ward 2 Councillor Cameron Croach's interest in this project and willingness to have a conversation about potentially putting the tiny cabin community in that ward. So I think there is still hope for sure. And I think other councillors around the table do see the value of the HATS model. And again, as everybody has said, it's not permanent housing. We're not trying to set up a permanent community of tiny shelters here. This is, to take Don's analogy of the flood one step further, this is a bit of an arc, right? It's saving people who have nowhere else to turn. And it's not going to help everybody, but it can help some individuals to find more supportive, affordable housing and to stabilize their lives, to get into that mode of housing. So I think we can still find a solution here, but it will take political will. Absolutely.
Well, then let's target or get at, if we can, some of the opposition. My background is not what all of you do. It's in public relations, and you need to, of course, identify the obstacles in a public argument if you're going to change how people see it. And one of the things that I've heard from opponents of HAT, but who are proponents of helping the homeless, people living in homelessness, is a concern around their rights. And so I'm just going to go back to you on this, Tom, and then I'll get to Dawn on a question around council. But what does it mean when I hear from people and they say, yeah, but it's about rights and a rights-based approach, and somehow HATS doesn't meet that standard? What are they talking about?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure, Laura, because we are very much approaching this from a rights-based approach. We have engaged people with the lived experience of homelessness, and in developing this project, we went out to talk to people who are currently unhoused, to ask them what they would like to see in this type of proposed community. And we heard back from them that they wanted to have good neighbors. They wanted to, have opportunities for engagement and skills development. They really wanted the autonomy that this sort of model would provide, and giving people a space of their own with a fridge and a microwave, some heating. It's not a lot, and it's not housing per se, but it is somewhere people can shelter from the elements and stay potentially healthy and safe. So from that, we're not, trying to identify this program as something it's not. It's really an opportunity to stabilize lives and keep people safe and healthy.
Don, when I listen to Tom, I think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That, if there is no shelter, what else, how do you get anywhere else in life? And so that seems like a fundamental, but it also sounds like giving dignity to people, giving them that bit of autonomy, giving their place. And I would assume it's easier to care for people and to help them transition. I know Wesley came out saying recently you're going to be trying to look at the root causes of homelessness and really getting at the problem. Isn't part of it giving people the stability to then be able to help them transition and help them get out of living rough?
Absolutely. Right to shelter, right to food security, right to primary health care, all the rights that we don't even think about them because they're there for us. So So, as Tom said, this is a port in a storm. When you've been on the street for a while, and the people that tiny homes tiny shelters are targeting are people that have been chronically homeless. You can need a bit of time to stabilize because you're in the survival mindset. You're in that mindset of where's my next meal? Where am I going to go to the bathroom? Where am I going to go to sleep? For those that are dealing with addiction, where am I going to get my next substance? And so that is literally your life. And so very often we take people right from the street and put them into housing. And even if it's supportive, they haven't gotten out of that survival mindset, and it fails. So what tiny shelters does is it gives people time to, as we've been saying, to stabilize, to develop relationships with the people that they're working with and then the people in the community that they're living with, because social capital is another need that people lack. And so all of these things will be present in a tiny shelter community, and it's not permanent. Everything that will be done in this community is designed to get people ready for that next step of housing or that next step of treatment if it's available. The fact is it doesn't exist. And so people are failing when we house them, or people, and a lot of times there's policies that says, well, if people are a certain acuity level or above in terms of their support needs, they don't even qualify for a lot of the programs that are out there right now. And when you get a group of volunteers that come together and create something so intentionally with so much thought, you would think that, as I said in my blog, where's the red carpet for this group?
So where is it, in your opinion? What's going on?
I've said to a few people on Thursday, NIMBY won. It won hands down. People showed up to protest, which is their right, and I don't know if that influenced council's decision, but it sure seemed to me that we're seeing, not just from the neighbors, but from our elected officials, that there might have been some not in my backyard going on. And I don't buy into the argument that there's too many services in an area. I think it's specious and it's not relevant. We don't complain when there's other types of things in a neighborhood. Well, sometimes we do, but if somebody's setting up medical services in a neighborhood, which in a way this is kind of, it's not clinical medical services, but it's clinical supports for social determinants of health. And we run into this opposition, then it's not just about oversubscription of services or what's in a neighborhood. It really is that people would prefer to have a say in where other people can live and be a citizen.
Sara, I saw you nodding emphatically earlier when the comment about the radial bylaw came up, and Don has mentioned it again now. You have done some studies on how other cities handle this. And let's tell our viewers, if they're not aware, this HATS idea isn't unique to Hamilton. It's been done elsewhere. So Sara, what is it, do you think, that Hamilton councillors, who I know are watching this program, what do you think they need to understand that maybe they don't yet about how other municipalities are addressing this similar crisis, and even how this program has worked? I mean, this is a best practice that we're looking at here.
Yeah, I think that's an important, Hamilton often, we're kind of the leader in doing new and innovative things, but this one has been tested in other communities, and they can call up councillors in other communities and ask them for their personal opinion if they want, and that's the important part of this, that it's not. It's addressing, as Don said, a portion of the population experiencing homelessness that really doesn't have targeted services. Encampments have been one of the top priorities that council has spent time on,
and money moving
and in the last few years, and the money has been around enforcement, and we've continued to see enforcement even with this new council, from what I can see, and as the main response. And so that has to change. And if they if there had been a consideration to say, okay, if we're going to delay this, let's also reduce the enforcement at the same time, because we're not being very fair to enforce the bylaws yet not have a solution for people instead. I think counselors don't know the services as well as service providers. They need to speak to service providers directly and understand. Service providers themselves will say, we don't have our program that we're funded for by the province or by the federal government doesn't, or sometimes by the city, doesn't give us the staffing levels that we would need for this population, or the specialized staffing we would need. And so they will say, we're not equipped for this population. We need a HATS. We need a program that is much more targeted and that gives people what that allows people to a people-centered approach where they decide what they want and how they want to live their lives in a way that is more community supported than encampments.
So, we've talked about some of the obstacles or oppositions in the public narrative, right? One being around the issue of rights. And you've said that this is a rights-based approach and it's about dignity. And there's been a lot of work done on ensuring that in consultations with people who have lived experience. We've talked a little bit about the NIMBY thing. Sir John A., the last councillor, wasn't so sure he liked it there. Well, he's gone. Cameron Crutch is in now and is open to having a look at his ward downtown. But we've also talked about NIMBY and Bill Curran gave a spot on Barton, and that's not acceptable. I believe that one's in Ward 3. So they're going back and forth with location. Maybe that's real. Maybe they're just trying to delay by never finding a perfect site. So let's go to the next one, which is around funding, around budget, around moving budget from affordable housing initiatives to this new initiative. Is that something that can be done? But let me ask you an even tougher question, Tom. If, like bike share, somebody comes along and says, you know what, Hamilton, we need this program. Here's $100,000 from our family to help this program happen. If council got a call from a family to do that, do you think they would go ahead with HATS, or do they really not want tiny shelters in the city?
Well, that's a great question, and certainly we'd invite anybody in the community to help out in that way. And we've already had tremendous support. Hamiltonians are incredibly generous, and they step up when there's a call like this. So the HATS group has already raised over $100,000, but we needed those operational funds from the city, because you can't just set up a community of tiny cabins and have people live there and hope it's going to go great. You really need the wraparound supports, and you need the medical assistance, and you need social supports, and so we do need staffing, and so that's really where our ask of the city for $100,000 over for the next 3 years came in. Certainly, I think our group would be very open if there was a philanthropist out there who wanted to help out. We'd love that. But I also think, Laura, the city has a responsibility, and I think it's not necessarily the municipal level of government that has caused this problem. We know it goes way back. It's almost a generation of lack of investment in affordable housing from the feds and the province that has really resulted in people being displaced in unprecedented numbers. People are losing homes.
Downloading provincially.
Yeah, absolutely. And people who have never experienced homelessness in the past are on the streets for the first time. And so now we need a unified approach. And yeah, it's great. There's new investments in affordable housing coming down now. We could argue whether it's enough. I would say it's not enough yet. But it's also going to take time to build. And so while those affordable housing units are being built, we need someplace safe for people to stay. And that's really where HATS comes in, providing that opportunity. And we hope, in 3 or 4 years, we won't be needed. And, we can close up the little tiny cabins, maybe sell them off to be garden sheds or something. We don't know. But let's hope that we can solve this problem as a community and really get everybody a home who needs one.
Okay, but you didn't answer my question. I mean, I loved your answer, Tom, but this is the OShow. If there was $100,000 given and it was going to cover those operational costs, and the city could say, okay, problem solved on our budget allocation issues. Do you think they would still give the green light for this project, or do you think that there's something philosophical or political behind some of their objections?
I don't think so. I don't think it's philosophical. There is a budgetary aspect to it, of course, but they have to do due diligence as well. But I think we have gone over and above what we've needed to demonstrate that this project can work, and we've done that evidence-based research and looking at the as you mentioned, looking at the other communities right across Canada, in North America, that have set up these tiny cabin communities, and they work. They do a lot better job of getting people stabilized into affordable housing, because Don mentioned this already. It's really hard to take somebody who's experienced homelessness for a number of months or a number of years and put them in an affordable housing unit and expect them to flourish. That won't necessarily happen. People need to move along a continuum and stabilize their lives and get used to maybe a smaller space first, and then with those supports that we're offering, can get a little bit more success in terms of stabilizing in long-term affordable housing.
So Don, Wesley has worked around and with this issue for 70 years in different capacities, not with hats, but with working with the most vulnerable people in our community and helping people. And you provide, many people know Wesley from the food program, but you do a lot of work with vulnerable people in our community. Do you feel like you're banging your head against the wall? You mentioned the red carpet concept. This is a community stepping up to provide solution, a little bit of a raft or an ark, as we've heard, in a flood. What do you think council needs to hear that they haven't heard? Maybe they didn't hear it in the presentations. Maybe they had other things that we've already talked about today that were on their mind. Like, what do you think they still need to understand from your perspective as a service provider in the community to this population?
That's a great question, and that's one of the things we bang our head against. It's not good enough to say people are dying. It doesn't seem to register. However, I keep going back to when council made a major decision almost as fast as lightning to completely rearrange how we get in and out of the downtown because of the tragedy of pedestrian deaths by motor vehicles. 9 people died. We have people dying of homelessness in greater numbers every single year, and we don't get the same type of emergency reaction that we did for that. And that's a lot of money. The budget piece, $100,000 is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, when you look at what a health sector spends in a second in Hamilton, it's not a lot. And I've seen it twice. We've seen it when, and this was the last council, I'll admit that, when they wanted $400,000 for more bylaw enforcement, they got it. And then they approved cameras for John Rebecca Park, which is kind of amusing when you think about it, because people who are homeless are living under cameras all the time in the downtown area. So to add a few more, I don't think would have really done anything. So,
the mayor just put forward an $11 million, I think, audit of the city's own election mistakes, right?
Exactly.
So money's available.
Yes. But, so it's how we prioritize. And let's face it, a lot of people don't want money going towards people who are homeless. For whatever reason, it's seen as a character flaw that mental health and addiction and homelessness they must have done something wrong in their lives for that to have happened. Well, they didn't. They were traumatized at some point along the way, and when they needed help, it wasn't there. And that's how you get to the extremes of homelessness. So again, it's a bit beating your head against the wall when you see the amazing things that the city of Hamilton and council has done over the years to address homelessness, and then for some reason there's a roadblock here, and I kind of said jokingly, I hope they sure don't try and delay this like they did last time until they're lame duck in 3.5-4 years. I don't think that will happen. But what I will say about the HATS group is they are determined. They see this as the emergency that we should all be seeing it as, and they will not, one way or another, this is going to happen. And between the citizens and the other agencies that are behind it to support it, this is going to happen.
Well, it may just be because it's a volunteer organization, but I checked out their website today, and the last news release they had, or news story they had up there, was when they were given the location donation, not this one about the delay. So maybe
Yes.
they are determined and they're not bothering
Yes,
to
they
post
are.
that. I'm not sure. But let me go to you, Sarah, because I know you were looking at rental issues around affordability, and Quebec City was another city that you looked at juxtaposing Hamilton. And I love Quebec City. It's sort of my favorite go-to place. When I think of Quebec City, though, I think about the fact that it's a very, very organized, planned city, how they paint certain buildings, their architecture, all that kind of thing. They really care a lot about optics in Quebec City. And I keep coming back to, is there an optics issue around this? I mean, Dawn talked about the fact that people associate a stigma with homelessness as though it's somehow a character flaw. They can't empathize. They don't see that there is the capacity for that to happen in their own lives. Is it that maybe council doesn't want to have a bunch of tiny houses in a publicly visible place where people can look at it and say, oh, the city of Hamilton isn't dealing well with its homelessness, it had to have a tiny shelter community? I mean, how do other cities like Quebec City that care about how they look, how do they deal with this? What can we learn from other places?
Well, I think, I don't think people are against the houses themselves. I think, people are against people and feel that they, sometimes they feel scared of homeless people, of people experiencing homelessness, unhoused people, and so there's that fear because the community is, we're all in our own little bubbles, and we're not creating relationships with the people around us. And certainly we know that trauma creates behaviors that are antisocial, and that can be part of it as well. But the advantage of this over encampments is the staff support that would be accompanying this, so that there would be much more support and conflict resolution to avoid escalating behaviors as compared to encampments, which are have no rules. And yeah, compared to other cities, Quebec City, we gave as an example of a city the same population size, same growth rate, and has much more affordable housing in terms of just market affordable, not subsidized, and many more rentals, being built. 3 or 4 times the number of rentals being built. And we attribute that in part to it has a stronger tenant protection system. It's different than Ontario. Some parts of it, people have advantages and disadvantages to any system, but in Quebec City, one of the big differences is that you, as a new tenant, are on the standard lease, are told what the previous rent was. So you can see, oh, the landlord doubled the rent, tripled the rent. That's not fair. And you can appeal it. And because the landlord has to say it and knows the tenant has a right of appeal, they don't put it, it's much less common for rent to double and triple, because landlords don't want to be taken to the rental board by a new tenant, and they'll kind of negotiate. And so that is fundamentally one of the problems in Ontario. Is we are landlords there's this perverse incentive for landlords to try to evict actively or passively, legally or illegally, a tenant who's not paying very much because they've been there for a long time, not paying what the market would pay now. And then they create a homelessness situation for no reason, just for their own profit. And that is one of the fundamental problems that council can't deal with by themselves, because it's a provincial issue, but they could do so much more advocacy.
Let's face it, they're fighting a provincial issue right now with the Greenbelt, right? Yeah. We saw all of our councillors out, and many of them, protest after protest. It's been terrific to see. So they will fight the province when they are incentivized to.
Yeah, absolutely. And another big difference in Quebec City that we saw was the law doesn't allow, there's certain evictions that you're not allowed as a landlord to do for a tenant who is 70 years old or older and has lived in the building for 10 or more years. And that is really important, because so many older people in this city are living alone in a rental building, are vulnerable to eviction because they may not, they don't have the mobility to access services in the same way. They don't have computer access, etc. And so protecting oldest renters is something Quebec does better and Ontario has to move on.
I love hearing that there are solutions, there are policy initiatives that can help with putting more people on the streets and that are more compassionate, and that work that other communities are doing. Thank you so much for your research, Sara, and at the Social Planning Research Council. I've often found that Hamilton, especially the old guard of council, kind of felt like they had to have all the solutions and all the ideas, right? And didn't seem to look at best practice very often. But you're bringing it to the table, and I'm hoping that the new councillors, those who I've certainly talked to on the OShow and who I know personally, they want solutions. So I hope that they're listening and looking at that and seeing where they can make those kind of fights. But Tom, just I'm going to ask you one last question here on the OShow on this. Tom, when I heard Sara talking about how they're not afraid of the houses, the tiny shelters, they're afraid of people. People are afraid of people. And it made me think of the actor from Sesame Street who passed away this week, and the song, "These are the people in your neighborhood," right? The song that we all grew up with listening to. I'm dating myself here, but in the 1970s, right? This idea of a neighborhood and knowing each other, not fearing each other, and understanding each other, where we're coming from. Do you think that the fear of people who might have antisocial behaviors from trauma, the fear of the impact on maybe commerce with some of these tiny shelters, do you think that what's really holding council back is fear? And if that's the case, Tom, I like to use the whatever you call it, with fear, it stands for false expectations appearing real. Is there anything you can say as a final comment here to deconstruct maybe some of that fear that some councillors may even unconsciously have about this HATS project, something that might help them look at it a little differently?
Yeah, and I agree. It's often fear of the unknown, and those people we don't know or maybe don't interact with all the time. And certainly there are multiple challenges that are facing individuals who are experiencing homelessness, and it's often about income security for sure. But you're right. There's mental health issues often at play as well, and sometimes substance abuse. But you're absolutely correct that we have to remember these are our neighbors. And we heard from one young woman the other day at council who had experienced homelessness, was living in an encampment, and really loved and valued the idea of these tiny shelters. And she's now been able to move on with her life. She got the assistance she needed, but there's so many others out there who don't. And we really need to invest in people. And thinking of how we can all come together as a community, learn from each other. We're getting tremendous support from right across the community for this HATS initiative, including from business owners. A small restaurant right across the street from where the tiny shelter community was proposed to go wanted to run a fundraiser for us. So there's lots of progressive and well-meaning business owners out there who want to see this move forward. There's lots of great community individuals who are being part of this, want to help get the cabins built and want to support the individuals there. And I really do think they outnumber those who are fearful. So I hope that story prevails and that we can all come together, especially at this time of year, to make this a go.
Don, this is a little unfair to put on you because Tom said it to me years and years ago, I think on the Laircast podcast, Tom, first time I interviewed you. Tom told me that when he had some visiting people from, I believe it was Sweden or Norway, Tom, come over and they heard about a food bank. They said a food bank, what's a food bank? Why would a country like Canada have a food bank? And Tom told me at the time, Don, that food banks were not supposed to be permanent. They were supposed to be temporary. And so I'm wondering if there isn't a little slippery slope fear going on here, that some of these councillors might think you set up these shelters and they're not going to go away in 2 or 3 years. The homeless crisis is going to get worse. They're never going to go anywhere. And now we're setting up these permanent kind of cabin cities, if you will. So as someone who, leads a stakeholder institution in this community that deals with this issue, What do you say to maybe that fear that's lingering, that this will actually become a permanent thing because there'll be no way to take them down at some point?
I guess I would say that we've been at this crisis has been in the making for 40 years, maybe 50 years now. And it's entirely because of a lack of political will around affordable housing, as well as services for people dealing with mental health and addiction. And so if you don't want them to be permanent, then political will from all levels of government is what you have to look at. However, I would also say that there's been tiny shelter communities that have become permanent in some places, and they're using shipping containers that they've turned into beautiful modular homes, beautiful modular apartment buildings with multi-stories using shipping containers. Atira Property Resources in Vancouver did that. They looked great. They have all the amenities that you would expect of a small home: bathroom, shower, kitchen. Here, because this is a response just to get people off the street, maybe their next step is a permanent tiny home, not a tiny shelter, but a tiny home with all the amenities. Because we always look at, do we need to build these massive multi-story buildings, or, the green belt is going to be paved over for monster homes? I think, the Hamilton Housing Action Plan says we can't keep doing things the same way. And HATS has come up with something that is different. And you're going to see a lot more things come up. It's not the same way. Maybe we start looking at permanent tiny shelter communities, not just for people who are homeless, but for people who don't want a big house. Mm-hmm. Again, we don't need to be limited by what happened before. And if we're going to have a Hamilton homelessness action plan that actually succeeds, then we have to take that line very seriously. We can't keep doing things the same way. We've been addressing poverty the same way for 2,000 years, when you think about it.
And it sounds like there are a lot of innovative things we can look at that you've just named, kind of blowing my mind, trying to visualize what you're talking about, Don. So there needs to be that approach to change, to innovating. And I'm hoping that this new council, I certainly advocated strongly for a new council. It's not going to be perfect, but is at least not going to be caught in the ideological ruts of the old guard, right? And the defensiveness and the territorial nonsense and fresh lens on these things. And so I'm grateful to all of you for bringing your expertise here and maybe adding more layers of thought to this complex, nuanced conversation for the counselors. They're, I know many of them, and they are great people, and I'm sure their heart breaks for people who are houseless and who are suffering. And that's probably why they're in public service. So the question is, what can we do to facilitate these innovative solutions? And so let me end with you on this, Sara. What do you suggest as someone who's a researcher and who really looks at these things? What last bit of advice or thought could you give to counselors and community members who want to maybe see HATS go forward or to address this problem with some urgency? Is there anything you can leave with them to think about?
Winter is coming, I think, is one of the most important message in terms of thinking about it in a emergency weather and what can happen when people are unhoused during the winter. It's the time of greatest risk, but also to be thinking about there's at the start of a 4-year cycle, and what is their plan over 4 years? What are they going to do in year 1, year 2, year 3, or 4 to improve the situation? Because right now renters are the highest one of the fastest growing groups in Hamilton, we found, growing 5 times faster than owners. And so Hamilton really needs to step it up and become a pro-renter city where we prioritize tenant rights so that we can prevent homelessness and prevent the types of situations that lead to needing something like HATS. So to be doing working on both the immediate protection of people, and then also the long-term protection of tenants, so that we avoid that we stop homelessness from growing even further.
I love that strategic perspective, right? Start putting into place and prioritizing, implementing some of these policies and some of these practical things like the renting situation so that we're preventing it going forward. And let's also give them the arc that they need as they are drowning on our streets and in the cold right now, to use Dawn's analogy. Panel, you've been brilliant listening to you, and I'm hoping that councillors and staff who are looking at this and bringing it back to council in January really can process through some of these concerns and understand where this HATS program may fit within the broader solution around the crisis of homelessness, affordability, and housing in our community. And I just heard the other day, a study came out that said for someone to enter the housing market in Ontario now, they have to make $139,000 a year. Can you even imagine that? So rentals may just be something that we have to really get our hands into in a serious way. Sara Mayo from the Social Planning and Research Council, thank you for your first time on the OShow. You're brilliant, as I expected. Dawn Seymour, as I said, relatively new to Hamilton, but already making an impact with Wesley, as Wesley has been doing for many years. Thank you for being on the program and bringing up some of these innovative ideas for us to look at. And Tom, for being the perennial optimist in our community around the issues of poverty reduction with the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. It's so great to have you on the program. We were going to have Jeffrey Nevin on. He joined us last year, wasn't able to make this date, but certainly Indwell is, of course, working on housing solutions as well. Sounds like we're going to have a lot of solutions at this incredibly complex problem that is affecting the life and death of our neighbors. It's urgent. Thank you so much to our OShow audience. As you know, subscribe on YouTube to get all of the latest OShows, and let us know what you think about the panel's recommendations in the HATS program to carry on the conversation here. Take care, everyone. Be safe. Thanks for watching the OShow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks.